Okay. Hi, welcome to Health Nights at Kettering SDA Church in Kettering, Ohio. I want to welcome everyone here in person and especially people on live stream that are tuning in. Also, I want to let people know on Wednesday nights we also have junior high and high school activities for your kids. If you're interested in coming down, visiting the church, bring your kids, they can have something to do. Come visit us on Health Night, learn something about health. Before we begin, though, I would just like to start with a little word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time and day. Thank you that we have the ability to come together, learn about how to live life more abundantly and more healthy. Thank you for the options of eating really good, tasty, healthy food and just really enjoying that part of life as well. And let's learn to, one, rely on you, but find ways to kind of deal with all the stress that we're all feeling. In your name, amen. All right, so we have a treat. The Coe family is here. And they, with their kids, and they're going to show us how to cook, and then we're going to demonstrate how to eat. And then Dr. Don Williams is going to talk to us about stress and anxiety. But first, let's go over to the kitchen.
Thank you, Dr. Han. My name is Tim Coe, and I have my two daughters here, Kara and also Kayla, and they'll be helping me out on this. So tonight we have something very simple, but yet it's very nutritious, and it's also very practical as well, too. And anyone can make this. And, several years ago when I was cooking, I didn't know this was possible. I'd always cook the oatmeal, and I found a recipe where you can make overnight oats. So what I typically do is on Sundays, because my week is super busy, is I make my batch of overnight oatmeal, and I just put a ton of them in the fridge, just like squirrel nuts, where they pack it for the winter, and you just pull it out whenever you want to eat them. So I'm going to show you real quick as to how to do this. Can you grab me some oatmeal? So what I do is, that one. What I do is I get the regular oatmeal. I don't get the 5-minute oatmeal or quick oatmeal or anything like that, so it's not processed. But as you guys probably know, oatmeal has a lot of nutrients to it, a lot of antioxidants, a lot of vitamins. And the most important thing that I think we're all aware of is fiber, and that's why I have oatmeal. So I'm going to throw some oatmeal in here. And what I do is I blend it down so that it makes it a lot more smooth versus chunky overnight. So you guys want to push it? Either one. And what I do is I get these containers here. And before I do that, I throw in some peanut butter. And the beauty of these overnight oats is you don't have to follow the recipe from a sense of what you stick in it. You can pretty much put anything you want. So if you want peanut butter, which I love peanut butter, I'm going to throw some peanut butter down here at the bottom. And then get me some honey. I'm going to throw some honey in here as well, too, just to sweeten it a tad. And again, you can put agave, or you can put sugar, or you can just put fruit in there. And what I also do, too, is put a little bit of vanilla extract in there to put flavoring into it. I've also used almond extract as well, too. So I just put a little bit. Oop, there it is. And then I also put a little bit of ground cinnamon. And I've also put nutmeg or allspice in it, just depending if you want to go the Christmassy route or skyline chili. Should I have said that? All right. The next thing is I do put chia seeds in here as well, too. And chia seeds have a lot of nutrients, and I'll let you Google it. But chia seeds also does provide energy. And again, just like oatmeal, it provides a lot of fiber. So I throw this in here as well, too. And some people don't like to put the banana in overnight, and they put it the next day, which is fine as well, too. But I throw them in the day that I make it so that I don't have to waste time the next day. So you can mash it up, or I just cube mine. And then all you have to do is just throw the ground up oatmeal in. And then you can put whatever liquid you want in there. So I use soy milk most of the time, but you can use almond milk or you can use coconut milk. So I'll just throw it in there. And just give it a good stir. And when you do this, it'll seem really loose at the beginning, but overnight, the next day, it will thicken up because the oatmeal will soak up the liquid, and so will the chia seeds as well, too. So that's it. I just throw it in the fridge, and then the next day, when I bring it out, I'll just have some cut fruit on the side, and I'll just throw it right on top of it. And that's your overnight oatmeal. So thanks for joining us. Yes. That is one serving, yes. Well, for me. Maybe 1.2, 1.3, I don't know. It could be. Yeah. So this is, we made some samples over here. So this one has peanut butter with soy milk, and then this one is coconut milk with no peanut butter in it. So. Any other questions? They do for the most part, right? Yes. You guys want to answer that? Yes. Yeah.
Do you like it? Yes.
Yeah, the kids like it because it's super easy, it's cold, and it's sweet as well too, and they can throw whatever fruit they want on it. So, what'd you say?
I put more peanut butter in.
They put more peanut butter, and Kayla says it's okay. I guess she doesn't need the fiber, so. All right. Or chia seeds.
Thanks a lot, Tim. All right, actually, you should get some samples, and then we'll come back here, and then we're going to get educated. Okay, I'm really happy to introduce a person I can call my friend, Dr. Don Williams. He's a counselor by trade, but also got his doctorate degree in counseling as well. And he's got a really interesting title. It's When Your Feet Can't Touch the Bottom, Strategies for Dealing with Stress and Anxiety. And I think everyone, even pre-COVID, this is an issue. During COVID, and hopefully eventually when we get post-COVID, this is still going to be a huge issue for us to deal with. All right, so let's welcome up Dr. Williams.
So, good to see you here. There are some handouts for those who are here. If somebody could pass those out, that would be good. An interesting title, but for an interesting time, as Dr. Hahn has said. If we think about stress and anxiety, our minds typically go to, and especially since we're close here to a hospital, it goes to those healthcare workers that have been in the hospital working. And I want to begin by telling the story of a friend of mine who is a mental health counselor down in Florida. And she was asked by a hospital system down there to go up on the floors each week for the evening shift and just be available to talk to any of the healthcare providers there. And she told me, as we were talking about this, about a gentleman that was a male nurse. He was a veteran of the Afghan war, and when he stopped her in the hall, he said, I've been through war, this is worse. And she went on to talk to him, about some of the stresses, and he was actually in tears as he told about the fact that not only does he have the stress at work, but being cut off from his family as well. He's worried about being a risk to his own immediate family, bringing something home. And what was really hurting him at that point, a nephew had been born. His brother lived in Chicago, he was in Florida, and he couldn't get up there to see his new nephew. And so as my friend was talking to him, she tried to give him a sense, thank you, of what to do. And she said, what would be one thing that you could do that might help your situation? He said, the thing that would be the nicest is something that I can't do. And that is, I want to take my wife, who's never been to Chicago, and that's where I grew up, but we'd like to go up there, visit family, show her the city, and especially see our nephew. But we can't do it. And so my friend said, well, why don't you plan on it? Anticipation is half of the joy of a trip many times. Why don't you go ahead and just plan for the trip and see what you can find in terms of travel and things to do and things like that. And so she left it with him there and didn't see him again until the last day that she was working on the floor. But she always wondered, well, that seemed kind of lame. Here's a guy who's been through war and says this is worse, and I'm telling him to plan a trip to Chicago, But in any event, it was something that, she at least at that time, and we'll come back to his story, but we have a problem. And as Dr. Hahn said, COVID has made some things worse, but it isn't like pre-COVID. There weren't stresses or anxieties. What are some of the things that people get stressed about or feel anxious about, let's say, besides COVID? I can't see you real well, but shout something out. Money, finances, yeah. We've had some interesting economic downturns starting in 2008. We recover from that. Now we're worried about inflation and so forth, so money is something. What about anything else? What can you think of? Family. Whether it's health-related or other things, especially now that we're sort of cut off, that exacerbates that and so forth. So, yeah, we've got enough things on our plate without having COVID to worry about. So there are three things that I'm going to lay out as the problem, but we're not going to sort of delve into the problem. We're going to be more solution-focused tonight. First is sort of I won't say on the surface, but the thing that may come first is anxiety. And you'll see a progression there. There's a feeling of unease, okay? So that's sort of a little unsettled perhaps that we feel about a subject, maybe his finances, maybe his family, maybe his health or whatever. And then it maybe get to worry, so that at first I was a little uneasy, but then I start to really think about it. Maybe it wakes me up in the middle of the night. And then if things don't lighten up and the problems may get worse, then it may turn to fear. And if it even gets worse than that, then it might turn to dread. So hopefully we never get there, but it's interesting that there's a continuum, isn't there, of anxiety that can start quite casually almost. We hardly notice it, little unease, but it can lead to some things that are fairly consequential. And then stress, something that, and you'll see I have eustress and distress, but the good definition of stress is a state of mental, emotional, and or physical strain or tension. And we all realize that we need stress. Actually, that sounds kind of crazy, but we all need stress. Physicians would tell us that if we don't use our muscles, pretty soon they'll turn to flab. If we don't get stress-type exercise, that our bones become brittle and so forth. So our bodies are actually built to take stress. And there are things that in our lives that we call eustress, which is good stress. A challenge at work. Planning for, a big family vacation or a big event like a wedding or other things like that. Those are stressful, but they're good stresses, and they actually can make us stronger and better. But then we have the distress, those stresses that are sort of corrosive, and they eat away at our well-being and our mental attitudes and so forth. And then if things continue, then we can even get to burnout. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced burnout. I have a couple times in my life, and it's something, it takes a while to get there. You may not, I didn't realize at first that it was happening, but if you've really experienced burnout, you kind of hit the wall. You know, I first did it in graduate school, and I found that I couldn't get the things into my head anymore. I'd kind of been overdoing it, and no matter how hard I tried, my grades actually dropped a full letter grade from one quarter to the next because of burnout. I remember hearing the story, someone was telling me a COVID story recently of a nurse who, in observing a chaplain working with patients in the room, praying with them, talking to them, comforting them, and so forth, she became very troubled by that. And the chaplain could tell that she was upset. And so after he was through with the family, he found her down in the break room and went in and talked to her. And, you know, what's going on? I noticed you were troubled by what happened in the room there. And she said, you are doing the very thing I got into nursing for. But I can't do it. He said, well, you could call me, you know, that's fine. She said, I wouldn't have even gotten to the place with those people that I would have done anything other than take care of the basic health needs of my patient, and I probably wouldn't have even called the chaplain. She was burned out. The tank, as she said, the tank was empty. She had nothing more to give. And that's a difficult place to get into. And so we're going to sort of leave those as sort of the background to some strategies that I want us to talk about that can help with those things. That went a little too far. There we go. No, that's where we want. Got to keep remembering my clicker here. So this is something as simple as the ABCs, okay? This comes from cognitive therapy in my field of counseling. And we've already talked about some activating events. Maybe there's a financial crisis. Maybe there's something going on in the family. Maybe there's a threat or problems at work. There's something that actually triggers an emotional response, okay? And so we think of it as that's the C, a consequent emotion, okay? You kind of got to work the words around so you can get the ABC in there, okay? So from my days as a counselor at a university a number of years ago, one of the most common complaints or problems that students would present with, and it would usually happen at either midterm or finals, is they'd come into my office, I just flunked a test. And then the next words, you'd say, well, there's an activating event, okay, something happened. And their next words were the C, my life is over. Or words to that, I mean, I've actually had them use those words many, many times. My life is over. My dreams are gone. Okay? And so they have this massive discouragement, maybe depression, maybe, demotivation, whatever. And so they see, of course, you flunked the test, and this is sort of a straight line cause and effect relationship. But the reality is there's a B in there. And the B is belief. What you believe about A is a moderating factor in C. Let me give you an example. Again, back to my school counseling days, I had a nursing student who flunked out of nursing. Now, there's an activating event for you. And that was the thing, as I said, most students came to me and they were devastated by the fact that they had flunked a course or perhaps flunked out of nursing or some other program. Except this young man was cheerful. He was overjoyed. Why? Because of the B. His belief about that, the flunking out was the best thing that had happened to him in a long time. He was a young man whose parents were absolutely convinced that he needed to be a nurse. And he did not want to be a nurse. And he tried to persuade his parents to let him do something else, and they wouldn't relent. And so he did the next best thing. He flunked out. And he was happy about it. Now, that's kind of an extreme example. It is a true example, but it's an extreme example of how our beliefs about something can moderate how we feel emotionally as a result of this activating event. And it's very, very powerful. We can think of the loss of a loved one. It's a whole lot different if it's somebody who's old, they've been in a lot of pain, they have no quality of life, we're sad, but our belief is it was good, it was time, they've lived a good life. They're gonna, we'll see them in heaven. We have all sorts of beliefs that kind of moderate that. If it's, as we have some good friends from our days in Florida who just lost a 38-year-old daughter to breast cancer with 2 little children. Well, A and C, are very much moderated by the belief that this was unfair, it was untimely, or whatever the case may be. And so this is, I think, a very powerful thing to realize that we many times have little control over the A's of our life, though some. We feel as though the C's are sort of almost inevitable. But the one thing we have 100% control over are the B's, our beliefs about a particular thing. Now, the interesting thing is that some of our beliefs are irrational, okay? So just to say that you have this belief doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good or positive thing, okay? And there are 3 P's, okay? Trying to keep it simple, but these are very powerful concepts of irrational things that we can do to the beliefs about certain things in our lives. The first is that we can take it personal. An example is a colleague of mine who would be out on campus on a given day, and if she happened to walk past the president of the university and he didn't acknowledge her, what did she think? He's ignoring me. I'm going to get fired. He thinks that I'm a terrible teacher. Literally, that's exactly, you think, whoa, that's really an irrational belief. And it was. And I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had with her to say, no, he was just talking to me about you and he thinks you're great. But her belief, she took it very personally. And so I would tell the president about that, and so he made for sure after that he always acknowledged her presence whenever she was around, because her tendency to take that belief too far. Pervasive. Sometimes we think, I flunked the test, but that's going to have consequences. Now, it may have consequences beyond that, but we allow that to creep into other parts of our lives so that it invades, it pervades other areas. And I'll tie it in with the 3rd P, and then you'll see sort of the distinction, and that is permanent. So the 3 P's of irrational beliefs are that we sometimes take things personally when they aren't meant that way. We allow that feeling about that particular activating event and that belief about it to go further than the actual boundaries of where it should. And then permanent, that how many times when you've been sick, you say to yourself at some point after a couple days, if it's lasted that long, you think, I'm going to always be sick. I don't know if you ever feel that way, but sometimes I do. It just seems like you get into a certain mindset, this will never end. Now, when I would have the students come and talk to me about flunking a test or whatever, and they would make the statement like, my life is over. Now, that's pervasive, isn't it? They weren't saying they were going to commit suicide, but everything was hinged upon this particular thing, and to have that now possibly threatened or going away is a problem. So I would rehearse certain things with them. I would say, well, do you have a family? Yeah? Now, okay, when your family finds out that you flunked this test or failed out of the program, I said, are they still going to love you? Well, yeah. I remember one lady saying, she had teenagers, and she said, Well, my teenagers would really give me a hard time about it because I'm always on them about their grades. Okay. But it's interesting how those things creep. And in fact, as we reviewed her life, while it was tragic that she flunked a test, and in some cases they flunked out of a program, their life was not over. In fact, we all know stories of people, maybe it's the story of our own career path, that sometimes we hit the wall and we think, maybe this is not where I belong. I remember a young lady we taught in high school years ago. She was convinced that she was going to be a graphic designer. She was a brilliant student, got just remarkable ACT scores, got a scholarship to college, enrolled as in a graphic design program, and flunked. What she forgot to calculate in there is that she wasn't artistic. She loved the dream, But the interesting thing is she kind of had to back up. It was discouraging. It was, change of plans. She became a physical therapist, doing a great job, So we have our ABCs, that our beliefs are very critical to kind of our emotional response. But sometimes our beliefs get out of whack. And we've got to try to do something about that. So step 2 in this is that, those words that you will probably say to yourself, like, I am such a loser, or whatever it is. We have our own sort of catchphrases that we use about, incidents like that, and they probably are repeats from other situations. But we've got, now that we're aware that we're sort of exaggerating, catastrophizing, sort of our beliefs are a bit irrational, then we've got to be aware and catch ourselves when that happens. When you start that self-talk, then you've got to say, wait a minute, I've already been down that road. We've already examined that this is gone too far. It is irrational. And then you do something next, you replace it. And that's something I would do with clients, is that part of this strategy is not to come up with some sort of pie-in-the-sky self-talk, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people love me, type thing. That's a bit pie-in-the-sky. No, it's very realistic. The things that we would replace it with are, I did flunk a test. That is consequential. What am I going to do about it? And then you have a plan. That's what you replace it with, is something that actually moves you in directions that are positive, healthy, productive in some way. And so this is a very simple but important strategy of, once you identify what those irrational beliefs might be in a given situation, and you may have certain tendencies. I had a colleague that I worked with a number of years ago that she was a direct report to me, and it seems like it, I'm probably exaggerating, she would walk into my office almost every week and say, I could just go to the top of the building and jump off. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard her say that. Now, she wasn't really intending to do that, but that was her way she was a catastrophizer, and it made it worse. And so we would spend the next few minutes in sort of metaphorical ways, talking her off the ledge of this catastrophizing tendency that she had. And it could end up in a number of different directions. So we have certain themes that we get into with these types of things, of our irrational beliefs about all of this. So first strategy was the ABCs, where we have the activating event, we have the consequent emotion, and we realize the power of those beliefs. The second strategy is that we have the 3 Ps. If we tend to kind of steer off the course a little bit with making it too personal, I have a rule, though, that I would tell the people that reported to me, and I try to live by it. It's sometimes hard. Don't take it personally, even if it's meant that way, okay? That's not a bad strategy, because that's their problem. As soon as I own it, it becomes my problem. If they have a problem with me, then they have a problem. And so, yeah, that's sort of William's law on that one. Even if it was meant personally, don't take it that way. It's a much simpler, much more productive way of dealing with things. So, the next strategy is reframing. Now, this is a very powerful thing. For example, we just talked about a reframe. My beliefs are this, my life is over, or whatever I'm going to have to jump off the building, or whatever we're saying. And we reframe that into more realistic, more honest, more productive ways. But we've got to catch ourselves and sort of reboot that whole belief that we have about that. So that's the first of a reframe. But the next one, I think, is a very interesting and powerful one. I don't know if you've ever thought about the Beatitudes as reframing. But here we have in Matthew 5, the first three of the Beatitudes, they're all reframes. Think about the things that Jesus has identified. The poor in spirit, Luke just says the poor. Those who mourn, those who are meek, you could think of them as doormats. Jesus said they're blessed. I can imagine in that crowd, that was like almost being slapped in the face. Like, what? Did I just hear this right? Those who are mourning are blessed. Give me a break. You know, the meek will inherit the earth. That's a joke. The Romans have us under their thumb, under their heel. But Jesus is trying to do something here with reframing, to say that what seems apparent, that the values of the kingdom are such that we can reframe in ways that can be very, very productive. And it's interesting, the next three are very positive things. You know, merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers, and then even the persecuted. He says that they're all blessed. Now that is a profound, and I would challenge you to think more about that if you have a chance, about what those reframes really mean. But reframing is a very powerful but true thing. To reframe again for something that's just silly or something that's not true, it doesn't get you anywhere. So you've got to, with that reframing, you've got to find something that is true and honest, perhaps going deeper than what superficially seems to be the case. So we have the reframing, the beliefs that we have, reframing that we see in the Beatitudes, and then the book of Ecclesiastes has a very interesting reframe that's there. The first two verses I have up here from chapter 2 paint a very dismal picture. If you've read the book of Ecclesiastes, you'll know that Solomon, who's written this story here about his life, I call it the I version of his life. I made wonderful things. He starts out by saying, I decided to search out wisdom and truth and find out about folly and all the rest of it, what God wants for people. And then he talked about, I built these wonderful things. I purchased everything that my eye, landed upon. I had all kinds of concubines and wives. I. And what does he end up saying? What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun all their days? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. Now, that's about the best description I've heard of burnout. I mean, how many times do we wake up in the middle of the night worrying about things? That's exactly what Solomon is saying here. But then we have this, again, this reframe that takes place in the next two verses. This is what I call the God version. The very next verse. A person could do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. I just thought you told me, Solomon, that toil was just meaningless. At one point earlier in the chapter, he calls it chasing after wind. It's all vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And yet now he comes in and says, You can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in your toil. That's what God wants you to do. You put God in the picture of those very things in your life that can burn you out. And it transforms, it reframes those things. In what way? Let's take work, for example. When I would do orientations for new nursing students, I would talk to them about this continuum that I saw in our career path. I said, how many of you work flipping burgers? And about half would raise their hand. I said, but you're here now going to nursing school, so you made a decision about that, didn't you? Yeah, we're moving on. I said, a job is something that you do to put food on the table. I said, you came here looking for a career. A career many times involves training, certification, it's a profession, and so forth. It's something you want to do the rest of your life. I said, that's great, but I'm going to challenge you to take one more step in the way you view what you're going to do, and that is to see it as a calling. I said, if you can understand that this is what you were made to do, that God has gifted you to do this service, to do this profession. When you do hit the wall, when you are sort of exhausted and the tank is empty, if you can see that deeper motivation, that deeper reason for doing it, have it aligned with the values of the kingdom, you're more likely to be able to survive and thrive, even through difficult times. So it's interesting, both in the Beatitudes of the New Testament and in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's some reframing. We can look at it this way, or if we bring something else in, we can have a very different view of it. I came across an idea recently called asset framing. Trabian Shorters is his name, a young man, fairly young, younger than me. Actually owns a consulting firm and works with corporations with what he calls asset framing. He said, most of what we do, if we have a problem in society, and we'll see articles written about it in documentaries and other types of things like that, and what they do is they want to grab people's attention, and so they'll talk about the disadvantaged or the poor, or the school to prison pipeline, or other things like that. At risk is a phrase that's used a lot, and so that grabs our attention. He said the problem with that, as true as each of those statements might be, is that they're a deficit frame. And we begin to frame that person and that problem within a frame of the deficits. He promotes the idea of doing asset framing. We take those very same at-risk students and we say, well, they're students. They have dreams, they have hopes, they have talents. They may have motivation, whatever it is. He begins to frame those individuals that we would start out by saying they're at risk, to see what their strengths are, to see what their motivations are, to see what their hopes are. And once that frame is there, an asset frame, he said, then we can begin to look at the deficits because we have it framed differently. I think that is a very, very powerful way of thinking for our society and where we are today. Have we framed the assets first before we get to the deficits, and we'll be able to tackle the deficits? He said the problem, and he's speaking himself as an African American, he said the problem is if it's a deficit frame, pretty soon the person that's been framed that way begins to identify with that. And they think of themselves as at risk, or whatever other label has been there. He said, I would never put down the fact that we need to solve these problems. We need to identify them and be very clear about it. But the truth is, if we start out with a deficit frame, we're never going to get nearly as far as we need to. So an asset frame. So part of reframing then is the B of beliefs. The Beatitudes is a good example. Ecclesiastes, and then I like this idea of asset framing. It all depends on what we're going to focus on as the way that we frame a problem. So, strategy 4, and this is our last strategy. Small steps. When I would have students that would tell me that they were worried about a test, they kind of churn on that. You know what it's like to churn. See your computer sometimes churning. Just grinds away, never really gets any place, does it? That little wheel is turning on your screen and it just drives you nuts, right? We do the same thing. We go over the same ground over and over again, and especially in the middle of the night. I would give them a piece of advice. That takes energy to churn. It does. It can wipe you out. The emotional energy you can invest in churning, worrying, and all of that, and it gets you absolutely nowhere. And especially in the middle of the night. Things always seem worse in the middle of the night. So I would say take that same energy that you would devote to churning and worry and anxiety and put it into action. So when you worry, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're worried about that test in the morning, then get up. Spend a half hour, spend an hour, study. You're going to be awake laying in bed anyway. You might as well make it productive. That way, when your head hits the pillow again, you've actually made some progress toward solving that problem that you're worried about. Well, my problems aren't with school. I'm out of school. Okay. You're worried about a family member. We can worry and worry. We have these terrible, imaginations of what might happen. So spend some time praying for them. Get up, write them a note. Do something. Turn your energy that could just be churning into action. Take back control. I have a friend who's working at a particular institution long ways from here. Nobody here knows this person. And their job is at risk. The boss said, I'd like to have you retool and kind of move over and do this here. You're no longer going to be a VP, you're going to be, this and that position and so forth. And this guy's thinking to himself, okay, this is my next step will be out the door type thing. And so he and I talk fairly frequently, and I said, what you should do, as much as possible, now you can't control your boss, but as much as possible, take control of the situation. I said, think about what you would like to do with the position he's offering and make it better. Get some ideas. Come up with a title. Look at what the responsibilities are. Propose something that actually accomplishes what he wants and that it agrees with your own goals as well. But take control. Don't just be a victim and say, okay, I don't know, I'm just waiting for the next shoe to drop. That accomplishes nothing. And so he did that, and actually it worked out fairly well for me. I know people that have tried that strategy. So as much as possible, and we can't control everything, take back control. Unplug, don't unravel. Now, we all have those little computers in our hands or in our pockets or purses that occupy a lot of our time. I want to quote Henry David Thoreau here. He said, better to read the eternities than the times. Now, he wasn't speaking of the signs of the times or anything. He was talking about the New York Times, actually, even in his day. But he said, you can spend your time sort of hearing the latest news feed or whatever, and for one thing, you can't do anything about it. And especially with our phones, we have no time to process it. I mean, it just keeps coming. What's going to happen next? And it just gets overwhelming. And we can spend a lot of time churning over that stuff. If we're really worried, if we're really anxious, if we're beginning to burn out, then we need some time to just unplug. The world will go on if you don't know what's happening next. And especially with things that you can't do anything about. You need to say, how much time do I really spend, paying attention to that stuff? Avoid the echo chamber. There are some people, and it happens at work, you're all sort of grumpy and something happened and you're all just grousing to each other around the water cooler, which doesn't happen anymore. I don't even know if they have water coolers, but it's a nice metaphor. We're grumpy and we're grousing and we're doing all that stuff with people and we're just in an echo chamber. Everybody else thinks, and we feed into each other's grumpiness and discouragement. You need to step away from that or inject something positive. Now, pretty soon they won't invite you to the water cooler anymore, but that may not be a bad thing, okay? A daily beauty regimen. I'm not talking about putting on your makeup. The power of beauty in our lives is a real power. It is real. To spend time in nature, to have something, a picture of a loved one in your office, to be able to contemplate the beautiful in our lives when we seem to be in a cloud of trouble. Recently, we went to New York City, first time that we ever spent some time there, and we had certain things on our agenda that we wanted to see, and so we went up in the One World Tower, which was the replacement of the Twin Towers, and we thought, boy, we got the tickets, we're going to go up there, and we did, and it was a foggy day. And I can tell you, we saw no beauty. We walked all the way around, and we saw the very same thing, the inside of a cloud. What you need to find in your life is, where's that beauty? Bring some to your office. Have some around the home. Go out in nature. Do those things. It doesn't take much time, but if you make that a regular part of your day, I think that can be a very helpful thing. Dimes and quarters. Now, what do I mean by it? What are dimes and quarters? What are dimes and quarters? Small change, okay? We talked about small steps, small change. Small changes. You can't change everything. You know, boy, unless I can get rid of this situation, you know, it's probably not going to happen. Do something small. I remember working with a client years ago who was so depressed that she had to take a medical leave from work. And she would come in to see me on a regular basis, and we had to deal with some very small steps. The first step we took was, I want you to set an alarm. I don't care if you get up, but I want you to make the decision to set an alarm every day. And we talked about what time to set it for. And over a week or two, she began to actually get up when the alarm went off instead of staying in bed all day. And then the next step was, because she spent the whole day in her pajamas, put on some street clothes. And then I want you to sit in the sun for an hour every day. And we went those small steps, and we were able, with small steps, small changes, to begin to move her in directions that were very healthy. Spiritual resources, I lied. There's one more strategy, okay? Spiritual resources. You're not alone. Oh, you have your family and your friends. But God knows everything about your life and is concerned and cares. And that can be a very comforting and very empowering thing, is to know that there's someone who really cares. Not only does he care, he understands. There is insight and wisdom that he has. His values, his word, and so forth can be very powerful resources in our lives. Prayer can make a big difference. And I'm sure that you found that to be true. But sometimes our prayers are very rote. Sometimes it just needs to be the cry of the heart. I like what it says in Romans 8, that the Holy Spirit knows our hearts and will cry out for us when we can't even put it into words. And sometimes we feel like that when we're at the level of dread or burnout or something like that. It's a very powerful thing. The promises. Years ago, I knew people, and you can still probably find them in online or something, books of promises. I would challenge you, those are good to have, but don't just get a list. Take the context. The promises of hope, that Jesus says in John 14 that he's made a better place and he's not going to go away and leave us. Okay, think about that. What does that mean? That there's light at the end of the tunnel, and all those promises are embedded in stories and metaphors and parables and so forth. I want to end by taking a look at one verse in the book of Isaiah. And I'm going to ask you to participate with me in this, okay? So the dark, bolded words that you're going to see are the actual verse from Isaiah 41. And I'd like you to read those. And then there's some other words that are sort of my reflections on that I will read. And so we'll kind of do it as what we might call a responsive reading. So I'll read the first with you as well. Fear not. If I live in fearful times and with things I cannot see, things I do not know, and things I cannot control. He does not remove what I fear or the fear I feel. He simply promises that I am not alone. So I need not lose heart, nor let my fears overwhelm, or my emotions win the day, or even deny how scared I am. Oops. Oh, this is doing something very different. Sorry, I'm glad I handed out that copy to you. I had them all blocked out to print, so I'm sorry for that. You have your copies, so if you can read, let's just keep going. For I am your God, right? Let's say that together. Because the King of the universe claims me, comforts me, changes me. With courage, with wisdom, through a partnership with the Spirit. So when my knees buckle, when my feet can't find the bottom, when I am ground down by my fears, I can trust him. So, questions, comments, observations, and then we'll be done.
Thank you. I have the first question. Back to ABC.
Yes.
I love that system. How do you nudge people to change the belief?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, we need to apply it to ourselves. To try to have the belief that I can change somebody else or nudge somebody is sometimes maybe a little difficult. I would say this, if I have the type of relationship that I can actually sort of either confront them or talk about that, is that true? I would try to, like I did with the nursing student, I would say, well, do you have a family? I would find facts that I know of about that first person, and I'd say, there's an interesting thing with memory. It's called state-dependent memory. And state-dependent memory says that the emotional state I'm in is a cue for the memories I can call up. So if I'm depressed, my memory cue will be depression and other times when I've been depressed. I have had many clients who have said, nobody ever loved me. I mean, they've said that just flat out. And so I would say, really? So your parents never loved you? Well, of course they did, And so I think to find something that may give an alternate reality, so helping them reframe is to give them, look at that problem from a different perspective. And I think that's the best way to do it. That's what I would do in a therapeutic relationship, but you can do it with family members as well. They're not always receptive, by the way, I should say.
I have another question, but any other questions? I can bring the mic over. The one thing I want to ask before our next question is, when you deal with someone, like we all have friends or family members that are pretty recalcitrant, do not want to change their attitude, beliefs, and how do you deal with the frustration with those people that do not want to? I mean, you're invested in them, you love them, you want the best for them, but it's like talking to a brick wall. They won't reframe, they won't change their beliefs, they won't look at anything positive. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's an extremely frustrating and I think somewhat common thing. I'm going to give one piece of advice that's probably, there are other things we could look at, but I would say, even in the worst of circumstances, maintain the relationship so that when they are ready, they will come to you. If we continually hammer them with stuff we've already said and things they already know, then pretty soon they begin to tune us out. Whereas if we've said our piece, they know what we think, they know what we believe, if we simply then spend the time, invest the time in the relationship, there will come a teachable moment. There will come a time, and if the relationship is still there, then they will come to us. And I think you'll find that that can be a very effective, but it takes extreme patience on our part. I just blew it with my son. I'll tell you this. I wrote him a text today that said, "Forgive me for giving unsolicited advice." Okay? I did. That's what I wrote today. Because he wasn't asking for my advice, but being his father, I just felt I had to get this off the chest. I don't think it made any difference because it was all stuff we talked about before. So I apologize for that so that we kind of reset the relationship back to a more healthy kind of thing. That's just what I would say. Keep the relationship above all else.
That was great advice. Wives, did you understand that first part?
Okay, we got hand here and then one over here.
Yeah, I just have a question. I feel like a lot of times comparing yourself to others kind of is a source of anxiety. Like you might be going along feeling like you're doing pretty well, and then you see your coworkers or whatever, and it seems as though to you they're doing just everything better, and you must be a failure because your best is not good enough. And any advice on how to overcome
Yeah, I think
that?
you've identified one of the most common things that all of us do. So thank you for bringing that up. This is my view on comparison, and I'm as guilty of it as the next person. But this is my view. I typically compare all of myself with the best of somebody else. So they're a great musician, but that makes me less than them as a whole person. Now, I may be a better athlete, I may be better in this or that, but that isn't the typical way that I make the comparison. I take their performance area where they get, all tens, and I compare that with mine. I think it isn't like, well, they're better in music than I am. It's typically, I put my whole self down with that. So I think if we can, that's one of those catch and replace situations that we've got to catch ourselves when we start going down that path. I have concluded two things about myself, and I'm close to being maybe the oldest person in the room, so I've had a lot of years of experience. I'm only really good at one thing, and that's being myself. I mean, that may seem simple, but it's really important that and therefore my effort is to be the best self I can be. And that is not in comparison to somebody else. And the other thing, in my field of psychology, we spend a lot of time talking about IQ, how smart people are, and we test their different areas of intelligence and so forth. And I figure every room I walk into, there are people likely that are quite a bit smarter than I am, and everybody else is pretty much on my level. That's my assumption that I've come to. But I've made this, when I catch myself comparing, because I've been in intellectual area, I've been in academics and research and scholarship and all that stuff, and so I'm always surrounded by people that are smarter than I am. And I have one answer when I catch myself saying that. My replacement is, I'm smart enough. I'm smart enough. I've gotten this far. I've been a reasonable success. Apparently, I'm smart enough. And that's somewhat imprecise, I know, but it's very comforting to me. So thank you for bringing that up. There's a question over here.
I was just going to ask if you want to make a few remarks about the way our DNA seems to control a lot of our stress and anxiety, and we seem to have some limitations as far as what we can do, but that's not a reason to despair and not try to work on these kind of things. But there is a tendency, to say, I'm somebody that just really stresses over everything, and my spouse doesn't stress over anything, and we're never going to meet in the middle. But
Yeah.
still encouraging people to work through these kind of ideas that you're having here and saying, but you can move it within that.
Well, this. I would say that you're right, that all of us can move the needle, with some effort and so forth. I would put a different challenge to you and I'm not saying you personally, but I would put a different challenge for that person that tends to be more reactive, or whatever label we might put on that. And that is that when it really comes down to it, all of our deficits have a flip side asset. And maybe what I would challenge that person who tends to be reactive to say, what are the positive things about that quality that I have? For example, one of the things, I got up in fairly high in senior administration, okay? But I came to the conclusion that I was really not presidential material, even though I could have seen that as my next step. But I realized that I had something that actually disqualified me for being president. And that is that I'm too sympathetic. There is something that a CEO has to have that has to be somewhat uncaring about other people's feelings. And so I had to admit that about myself, but I also said, thank God that I am sympathetic, because that is also a positive thing and has served me well as a teacher and as an administrator, but especially as a counselor. So I think that if we only frame something as a deficit, like I tend to be reactive, or I'm a catastrophizer, or whatever we might say, and it may go back to genetics, may have been the way our parents were, nature, nurture, and all that. We can never really sort of parse all that. But I would say the real challenge isn't just to work on the strategies to sort of make that better, but also acknowledge, maybe as a spouse or a friend, that person, that quality that person has that has that downside, has also made them something very special on the positive side.
So, a practical question. Like, you can't
This
flip
hasn't been practical?
Very practical.
Okay.
Actually,
All right.
I loved
Just
your,
trying
I
to
loved your
be clear.
talk.
Just teasing.
But you can't flip the switch. What is a reasonable time period to work on changing your belief system, working at reframing, where you think you can have a noticeable impact on your outlook?
So I'm going to put your comment and this gentleman's comment together, because we have certain tendencies. I'm going to predict that we may struggle with some of these strategies our whole life. That is something to simply be aware of as a strategy, you know. Just like so many areas of our life. Some people, you know, I know more skinny gluttons than I do fat ones. Okay? There are some people that have natural tendencies for being trim and slim and so forth, and other people who have different body types. And the person who has that other body type, and I'm sort of the Pillsbury Doughboy in between, you know, but I will have to struggle with that my whole life. And I build that into my whole routine to say, not that this is bad or this is who I am, oh, isn't that too bad? But no, I have the opportunity to change, but I'll probably work on it. Some people who are impatient, I'm guessing that their quick reaction to people and which by the way is the ability of discernment, is the gift of discernment, okay? It's the positive side to that. But they may struggle with that impatience their whole life. So I would say let's set out a lifelong path. Hopefully it's not discouraging, because I think we can see progress. I believe I have become, I used to be a perfectionist, which is kind of a tough road to be on. I have become what I call a pragmatic idealist. I have those ideals that I used to think when I was younger that I could actually accomplish. I always fell short, and it was very discouraging. So now, as a pragmatic idealist, it's a very conscious choice I have to make to fight against my perfectionism, is that I don't want to abandon my ideals. They're always that goal out there. It's always out of my reach, but it's something I aim toward. But I'm pragmatic enough that I know that I will take those small steps toward that goal. And at least if I'm moving in that direction, then there's a sense of progress and growth.
Any other questions or comments?
I kind of got a comment. Going back to framing at-risk children, because I have a 14-year-old that is on the spectrum and ADHD. And he goes to a public school, Kettering Fairmont School. And they are always concerned about his defects. And he himself has told me in the school, well, I'm special needs, I'm supposed to act that way. And they don't do anything with his assets, and I feel like he doesn't feel like he has to live up to any expectations because everybody tells him he's special needs, so you're supposed to act like that. So I don't know how to convince him that, no, you don't have to act like that the rest of your life, and then people shouldn't be telling you to act like that.
So this is the challenge, and it's come up several times in different ways, is that there's a history already, isn't there, of him hearing certain messages.
Yes.
So you know that to reverse that, I remember reading in a book on child rearing one time that you need to have 4 positive messages for every 1 negative message to your children. Now, I don't know if that was scientific or what, but overwhelmingly, if we can keep the positive, in greater proportion than the negative. Not that you're giving him negative, but I'm talking the world does that.
Right.
And so I think that, it's, especially at that age, the early teens are already a time of great question and identity and who am I and all of that. So he's got that layered on top of whatever messages he's received. So I'm thinking, to set a goal, maybe some strategies, talk to him. Maybe you have an asset list that you work on, certain skills, certain things. I remember one child of some friends of ours that struggled in school, but they had one thing that they really did well. And so that's where the parents, they put their time and investment into that. And I can't remember if it was music or it was something else, but they found something that person was good at. And some, you struggle. I worked at some camps for those that had severe mental disabilities. And what I found is that those were some of the kindest, sweetest people that I ever met. Now, we might say, well, they don't have much in terms of intellectual capabilities. We were able to see in them some wonderful qualities. They had a picture of God that was so beautiful. So even with those whom we might say, well, what do they have to offer? It doesn't matter. I know people, the young lady that I told you about at the beginning, who's a mental health counselor, now has her PhD. When she was in elementary school, she got it put in the special needs class. And she spent 4 years, the first 4 years of elementary school, in the special needs class. And I can tell you that she still talks about it today, and she's in her mid-40s. But she had to begin to slowly sort of rise beyond, and it didn't help that her 2 brothers were brilliant, it's just. But she is an absolutely remarkable individual. The story of Temple Grandin, who's on the spectrum and who has gone on to do remarkable things with animals and so forth. The stories are there, and so I think that asset framing, it's an uphill battle because the world will not help us in that. But if we can, and as parents, especially when they're in their teens, they may not want to listen to us particularly. If you can get somebody else to help you with some of that messaging, But it's a challenge. And I know somebody whose high school principal said, you think you want to go to college, but you're not college material. Those things happen. Those messages are out there, and it's tragic. But those who love them, we sort of have to rally them and find in it. I look at it this way. This is an idea that I came up with. This person said some people are 50-piece puzzles. Some people are 100-piece puzzles. Some people are 500-piece puzzles. Some people are 1,000-piece puzzles. It takes, the more pieces in the puzzle, the longer it takes to put it together. But typically, the more beautiful the picture when it's done. And it sounds like your son has a very complex sort of set of assets and maybe deficits or whatever. It's a very complex picture, and it will take more time to put that together. But when it comes together, you'll find some very beautiful things there. Anyone else?
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're going to end. This show will be archived on the Kettering SDA Church's YouTube channel, so you can view that, share it with your friends. Dr. Williams won't say this, but he is actually a poet. You probably can tell from the last page of the handout. And I've read his book on Ecclesiastes, highly recommend it. Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Thanks for coming. And I apologize that I was way ahead of the thing here. The animations didn't work with my